The number one thing that I get guys coming into my shop for is string changes. Now, a lot of the time, I tell these guys, you don't need new strings, you need to take care of your strings, or you don't need new strings at all. Or sometimes it's you only need a new string and not new cables. And sometimes it's like, dude, you should have come to me 6 months ago. So, when do you really need a string change? I'm going to break it all down. So, the first thing to note here is that the odds of needing a string and cable change are quite low unless you have low quality cables to begin with. Because your cables don't move very much, they actually don't wear down very quickly. Sometimes you'll see a little bit of serving separation that comes around the tops, or I guess the bottom, depending on which side of the cable you're looking at. You'll get a little bit of serving separation just where some of those more aggressive parts of the cam track are. That's okay. That can often happen even with a high quality string set. That can often happen even after just a few shots, just because of the aggressiveness of some cam systems. It's not a problem. It's kind of ugly, but it's just unfortunately the reality of some cam systems. They're going to make that serving separation happen on some cables, even if they're brand new and high quality. So that isn't necessarily a reason to say you need new cables. A reason to suggest that you would need new cables is if you have excessive serving separation to the point where like you can twist it with your fingers or you could move it back and forth. Then that's either, the serving itself needs to be fixed, which not a lot of shops can do, but if you find a shop that can do it, that can save you a lot of money, or you just need to get new cables. In general, I try to avoid switching cables at all costs because really the cables are where the tune or setup of your bow is. The string is just there to serve a function for the most part. The cables are what's holding everything together and keeping everything shooting properly. So I try to avoid switching my cables at all costs. If you're having excessive fraying on your cables, you might need to change them. If you have any of the more modern systems for the cable guard, you shouldn't ever experience much damage or wear around where the cables are going through the cable guard. Some of the older bows where it's literally just a piece of plastic that your cables are rubbing up against, those can wear out quite quickly, unfortunately, especially if they aren't served on that portion of the cables. Then you're probably going to see fraying fairly early in that cable set's life, and that's going to require more frequent changes. Now, most of the bows that I see come into my shop for string changes only need a string and the cables are fine. Strings are the piece that move the most. Cables don't really move that much, but the string is moving a ton. It's taking a massive amount of abuse, and it's also the most exposed part. Like when you're walking through the bush, the string is the part that's going to be rubbing up on trees and brush, and the part that, if any part of your bow touches the ground, it's going to be the strings. The cables are pretty well always protected. So it's almost always just a string. A little bit of fraying is normal and okay, especially if you live in a drier climate like where I do up in Alberta. It's very dry here, and I pretty much always have a little bit of fraying on my string. You can always keep wax on it. I prefer to keep as little wax as possible on it for the sake of consistency. If you were to feel my string right now, it feels almost like there's nothing on there for wax, and that's because there's almost nothing. But I will just put the smallest amount just to manage that small level of fraying. Now, there's a difference between fraying where it's like just little hairs almost coming off of the string and actual strands being cut. If you can see that an actual strand of your string has been cut, don't even shoot your bow. Bring it to someone like me, bring it to a shop. It needs to get replaced. The other thing on a string that'll tell you if it really needs to be replaced, or it could just be that part needs to get replaced, is your center serving. It's very, very common for serving to separate right below the bottom part of the D loop. Super common, again, not an issue, but if it gets excessive, and you just use your own judgment to assess this, if it gets excessive, you either need to get your serving changed, which again, it can be hard to find somebody who can do that, let alone do it well. And you might just need an entirely new string if you're experiencing a lot of fraying and that center serving is just worn. You might just want to swap the whole string. But remember that you can just swap a string. You don't need to swap the string and cables, and you can save yourself good money in the process. Now, if you are going to change your string, a couple things just to keep in mind. If your bow is perfect, like this is my bow right now, it is perfect. I don't want to touch it. If I had to do a string change, which I'm actually going to do soon here for, not because these are worn out, but we'll make another video about that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make a few measurements. So the first measurement I'm going to take is from the middle of my peep, right where it's tied in, to this point right at the bottom of the top cam where the string comes off the cam. Whether you want to measure it from this point here on the top side of the string or the bottom side, that's totally up to you as long as it's consistent. I'm also then going to measure again from the middle of that point where my peep is tied in to the middle of my D loop, dead center. Write all that down. I'm then also going to measure from the middle of my D loop and my knocking point to where the string comes off the bottom cam. And again, if you want to measure the top side or the bottom side, it doesn't really matter as long as it's consistent. Write all that down. That's going to give you your baseline to set this up exactly as it was before. And if you don't change your cables using those measurements on your string, you'll be back to pretty much perfect. Often when I do that, as long as the string weights are matched and in the right position too, the bow just shoots identical. There's no messing around with it that has to take place. If you lose any of those measurements or you don't take any of those measurements, you're pretty much back to square one in terms of finding your knock height, finding your peep height. It can just be a real pain in the butt. So take your measurements, assess whether or not you really need to change your string, and especially assess if you need to change your cables, because we want to avoid that at all costs. Hope this helped you guys out. Thanks so much for watching. And by the way, if you have any ideas for videos that you'd like to see, let me know in the comments below. I'll be happy to make a video for you guys. Thanks for watching.